and welcome back to Otaku no Video. As always, thank you very much for joining me for this primer on the anime franchise Neon Genesis Evangelion. I'm going to talk about where it came from, why it was made, and the different movies and such that have resulted from it. Now, to understand Evangelion, you need to know where it came from. It was created by a studio named Gainax that was founded by a bunch of otaku. These otaku got their start organizing conventions, fan conventions, as well as running basically an otaku store. Now, that had done well enough that they decided to produce a short animation for one of these conventions, and they found some otaku who are also professional animators, particularly one named Hideaki Anno. Hideaki Anno was already well respected for having worked on the original Macross series, as well as Nausicaa of the Valley of Wind. He helped them make Daikon 3 and Daikon 4, two very well received animated works for these conventions. Now that caught the attention of the various companies that they were working with that financed various anime series and were working with Gainax to supply their anime goods store. These financiers basically told Gainax, hey, if you want to make an anime work, we'll help finance it. This led to Gainax producing animated works, The Wings of Honey and Mise and Nadia of the Secret of Blue Water among them, and more on Nadia in a second. Unfortunately, Gainax was run by fans, not business people. They kept getting horrible deals and just not making any money whatsoever. So they kept running very close to bankruptcy. Finally, everyone got together and said, okay, we're going to try to make one more TV show. And if this doesn't work, we may have to just close the company because of the amount of money we're going to have to pour into this. They were perfectionists too. So Anno was given the director's chair, and he basically threw in everything that interested him. And when I say everything, I mean religious cults, anime mecha series, themes about growing up, Christianity, all these things were thrown together. Now, it's important to point out here that Anno at this point was not a scholar in any of these areas. He was just interested in a lot of things and decided to throw them all in one show. It's not a complaint, it's just to point out that he did what all great artists do. He took many things, put them together, and let them all feed off each other. Moreover, he was apparently kind of cheesed off. Something had happened during the production of Nadia, which had gotten Anno kind of annoyed with otaku. So Evangelion is to an extent a reaction against how he felt that otaku had been evolving in a negative direction. Then two things happened during the actual release of Evangelion on television. The first was the kind of off-screen sex scene with Misato later on in the series. Evangelion was broadcast on television on Sundays in, I believe, the late afternoon, early evening time slot. This is basically a family time slot, and so there were a lot of actual complaints to the station from PTA members and mothers and so forth saying, here's this basically a sex scene in a series during primetime family time. This actually caused the TV censors to sit up and take notice. Up until this point, anime had kind of slid under the radar. You could do almost anything on television with anime up to that point, and that was when TV censors started really looking at anime and forcing it towards the later time slots that anime now usually shows up on. The second event was external and tragic. A cult named Aum Shinrikyo released sarin gas in the Tokyo subways and killed many, many innocent Japanese people. Unfortunately, Anno had already written a scene and a whole sequence similar to this for the climax of Evangelion. So he decided to go back and completely rewrite the ending. And this was happening right as, well, Gainax was running out of money for Evangelion. Again, fans, not business people. So they were having a lot of trouble pumping out the number of frames and drawings they needed for Evangelion, which resulted in an unusual ending. So the end of Evangelion cheesed off a lot of people and was very controversial. This helped propel Evangelion to a level of popularity that Gainax, frankly, didn't quite expect. One of the founders of Gainax has said that they just didn't know how to structure business deals, but fortunately Evangelion just wouldn't stop making money. People just kept pouring money into EVA merchandise and things like that. So it actually helped not only save Gainax, but flourish for some time to come. Meanwhile, computer games were starting to become a really major thing. And there's this story that one day an animator, Gainax, hauled a computer into the offices and set it down and said, "You guys have got to see this. They've got these games using crappy anime-style art. It's just going to be story games, and they're card games and poker games and so forth. And they just look terrible, and we could totally do this. It's easy to program these things, and we can draw good art." So Gainax started actually producing computer games using its own characters, and it was the EVA games, particularly the EVA strip poker games, oddly enough, that also brought in so much money for Gainax that it kept keeping things going and encouraging them to make not only more Evangelion merchandise, but more Evangelion anime works. So Gainax and Anno decided to actually copy the structure of an earlier anime series, Space Runaway Ideon, that they've said was a major inspiration for Evangelion. Ideon was a TV series which was then made into 2 movies. One that retold the first 2/3 or so of the TV series, and the other that completely reanimated and did a complete rewrite on the ending, making it much bloodier. So not long after the release of the Evangelion TV series, saw 2 Evangelion movies, Death and Rebirth, which retells the story of the TV series, or at least most of it, and End of Evangelion, which completely reanimates and retells the ending, completely rewrites the ending of Evangelion in a very different and much bloodier way. This only served to cause more controversy and get the fans worked into even more of a lather than they had before, making Evangelion not only a popular but also a much talked about series. In the early 2000s, Hideaki Anno started looking into the idea of making several movies that would retell Evangelion from scratch. Meanwhile, in the mid-2000s, Yoshiyuki Tomino of Gundam released his Zeta Gundam: A New Translation movies, which basically did the same thing for Zeta. Now, no one knows exactly what was going on, but it's likely that Anno saw that as inspiration of saying that yes, this could be done. Anno then released the Rebuild of Evangelion movies. These are planned 4 movies that are retelling the story of Neon Genesis Evangelion completely from scratch, introducing at least 1 new character and reworking the plot structure of the entire thing, with Anno now not subject to the same budgetary constraints he had before. Interestingly, these new movies are made by Studio Kara, a completely new studio that Anno is in charge of, and that is working with Gainax on licensing and so forth, but is completely separate from Gainax. Meanwhile, Yoshiyuki Sadamoto, the original character designer, has been drawing his own manga version of Neon Genesis Evangelion. This is his own retelling of the story based on their original ideas for the story, plus I'm sure Sadamoto's own little ideas. So there you have it. There is, of course, much more depth in any of these we could dive into, but in terms of the actual works and how they all fit together, that's the Evangelion franchise. Gainax, which was formed as part of a